The year was 1987, and a young Melania Trump had just enrolled at the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia. From the outside, she appeared to be an ordinary student of design and architecture, blending seamlessly into the crowd of ambitious youth. But the truth was far from ordinary. Melania carried a secret that, if revealed, would have the power to reshape history, and your perception of her entirely. It all began one crisp September evening during her first semester. Melania, who was already known for her quiet but striking demeanor, found herself drawn to a peculiar figure on campus, Professor Viktor Stranov. Professor Stranov wasn't just any faculty member, he was a physicist with a reputation for being eccentric. Rumors swirled that he had connections with high-level government officials and even secret research programs during the Cold War. But what caught Melania's attention wasn't his accolades, it was his obsession with a concept he called temporal seeding. Victor had a theory: moments in time could be influenced by carefully planted seeds of action. These seeds, once sown, could grow into massive events that altered the course of history. His research bordered on the metaphysical, blending quantum physics with ancient mysticism, a combination that both intrigued and terrified Melania. One evening, Victor invited Melania to his private lab, tucked away in the basement of a university library. She hesitated but eventually agreed, driven by curiosity and an inexplicable pull. The lab was unlike anything she had seen, walls lined with complex equations, strange artifacts, and what appeared to be a machine that buzzed with an eerie, otherworldly hum. "Let me know if you'd like me to continue." This is just the beginning of the journey into her mysterious college years. As Melania stepped into the lab, the hum from the strange machine seemed to resonate in her chest, almost as if it were alive. Victor greeted her with an unnerving smile, his glasses glinting under the dim light. "Melania," he began, his thick accent wrapping around her name, "you are not here by chance." She frowned, unsure how to respond. "What do you mean?" "I came because you asked me to." He chuckled. "No, my dear. I mean your existence, your presence in this timeline, is no coincidence. You were meant to be here. Tonight, we embark on an experiment that will forever bind you to the fabric of history." Melania felt a chill crawl up her spine. She glanced at the machine, its strange lights pulsating in a hypnotic rhythm. "What is that?" she asked, pointing. "It's the chronoseeder," Victor explained, his voice filled with a mix of pride and excitement. "A device I have spent decades perfecting. It uses quantum entanglement and harmonic frequencies to send data, information, backward through time. But this isn't just about science, Melania. This is about shaping destiny." Her skepticism was immediate. "Shaping destiny? You mean like time travel?" "Not travel," he corrected. "Influence. Think of it like planting an idea in the past, one that grows into a reality in the present. A whisper in history's ear that changes the world forever." Melania shook her head, half laughing. "This sounds insane." "It does," Victor admitted. "But so did electricity before it illuminated the world. I don't need you to believe, only to participate." Despite her reservations, something about Victor's words intrigued her. She had always felt that her life was destined for something greater, something beyond her small hometown and her current studies. Against her better judgment, she stayed. "Fine," she said. "What do you need me to do?" Victor's face lit up. He handed her a thin metal band with glowing blue lines that seemed to shift like liquid light. "Put this on your wrist. It will link your neural patterns to the seeder. Your thoughts and memories will act as the seeds we plant." Melania hesitated but complied, sliding the band onto her wrist. It felt cold at first, then strangely warm, as if it were syncing with her body. Victor adjusted a series of dials on the machine, the hum growing louder. "Now," he said, his voice grave, "think of a pivotal moment in history. A moment you believe should have gone differently. Focus on it." Melania closed her eyes. Images flooded her mind, war, famine, revolutions, but one moment stood out, the assassination of John F. Kennedy. She didn't know why, but the event had always fascinated her. She pictured the motorcade in Dallas, the fateful shot, the chaos that followed. "I've got it," she whispered. Victor's hands moved rapidly over the controls. The machine roared to life, filling the room with a blinding blue light. Melania felt a strange pressure in her head, like her thoughts were being pulled from her skull. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. She opened her eyes to find Victor staring at her, his expression unreadable. "Did it work?" she asked, her voice shaky. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned to a small television in the corner of the room, tuning it to a news channel. The broadcast was ordinary at first, but then something strange happened. The anchor mentioned an event that hadn't happened before, something about President Kennedy surviving an assassination attempt. Melania's heart raced. "Wait, that's not right. He didn't survive." Victor grinned, his eyes alight with triumph. "He does now." But this was just the beginning. What Melania didn't realize was that her involvement with the chrono-seeder would have consequences far beyond her control. Over the coming weeks, she began to notice subtle changes around her, friends who remembered events differently, professors who seemed to recognize her despite never meeting her before. And then, the dreams started. Every night, Melania found herself reliving different moments in history, each more vivid than the last. She saw the rise and fall of empires, the birth of revolutions, and even her own future, marrying a man who would become one of the most controversial figures in modern history. "Why me?" she demanded one day, confronting Victor. "Because you are unique," he replied. "Your mind is a conduit, perfectly attuned to the seeder. You were chosen, Melania, to shape the world." But as the changes rippled through time, Melania began to suspect that Victor's intentions were not as noble as he claimed. The events she had influenced were spiraling out of control, leading to unforeseen disasters. She realized too late that meddling with time was a dangerous game, and she was at the center of it all. Melania couldn't shake the unease that followed her every step. The world around her was subtly wrong in ways she couldn't explain. People she thought she knew acted differently. A professor who once despised her now treated her like a protégé. Small, seemingly inconsequential details, like the arrangement of buildings on campus or the names of historical landmarks, were inexplicably altered. The final straw came when she woke up one morning to find a newspaper on her desk, the headline blaring, "Kennedy's Legacy, a World Without the Cold War." Her stomach churned as she skimmed the article. The entire timeline of the 20th century had shifted. Without Kennedy's assassination, the Cold War de-escalated, leading to early disarmament agreements between the US and the Soviet Union. While it sounded like a utopia on paper, Melania knew better. History has an unforgiving way of balancing itself, Victor had once warned her. She stormed into Victor's lab, her emotions a storm of anger and confusion. "What did you make me do?" she demanded, slamming the newspaper on his desk. Victor barely glanced at it. "What we agreed to. We changed history for the better." "No," she shouted. "You don't understand. Everything feels wrong. People are different. My memories are different. This world isn't mine anymore." Victor sighed, leaning against his desk. "The seeder doesn't just change the timeline, Melania. It changes you too. You're tied to every alteration. That's the price of being the seeder's anchor." "The price?" she echoed, her voice trembling. "You didn't tell me this before." "I didn't think you needed to know," he replied coldly. "You wanted to be part of something greater, didn't you? This is what that looks like." Melania stepped back, her mind reeling. She wanted to scream, to rage against Victor, but deep down, she knew he was right. She had agreed to this, even if she hadn't fully understood the consequences. That night, the dreams returned with a vengeance. But this time, they weren't just visions of history, they were warnings. She saw a version of herself standing in a lavish golden room, surrounded by men in suits. They hung on her every word, but their faces were shadowed, their intentions sinister. Behind her, a mirror reflected a version of herself she didn't recognize, a cold, calculating woman with eyes that betrayed no emotion. In another dream, she was standing in the middle of a battlefield. Soldiers marched under banners bearing symbols she didn't recognize. Cities burned in the distance, and the air was thick with ash and despair. "You've set this in motion," a voice whispered in her ear. She turned, but no one was there. She woke up in a cold sweat, the images seared into her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that the dreams weren't just dreams, they were glimpses of a future she had helped create. Determined to find answers, Melania began digging through Victor's notes, which he kept locked away in a filing cabinet. It wasn't easy. Victor was meticulous and paranoid, often speaking in cryptic phrases and writing in a code only he seemed to understand. But after weeks of effort, she uncovered something that made her blood run cold. The chronometer wasn't just a tool for altering history. It was a weapon. Victor had been working under the guidance of a shadowy organization, one that sought to manipulate time not for the greater good, but for power. They didn't care about the ripple effects or the collateral damage, they only cared about controlling the timeline to serve their own ends. And Melania was their unwitting pawn. A plan to set things right. Melania knew she couldn't trust Victor anymore. If she wanted to fix the damage she had done, and reclaim her own identity, she would have to destroy the chronometer. But doing so wouldn't be easy. The machine was heavily guarded, and Victor seemed to anticipate her every move. She began to play a dangerous game, pretending to go along with Victor's plans while secretly plotting her rebellion. She reached out to a small group of trusted friends, fellow students who had noticed the strange changes on campus and were willing to help her. Together, they devised a plan to sabotage the machine. The night of the operation, Melania and her allies snuck into the lab under the cover of darkness. The cedar loomed before them, its lights pulsating like a heartbeat. Victor was nowhere to be seen, but Melania knew he wouldn't stay away for long. "Are you sure about this?" one of her friends whispered. "No," she admitted. "But it's the only way." As they worked to dismantle the machine, alarms blared throughout the building. Victor burst into the room, his face a mask of rage. "You don't know what you're doing," he shouted. "If you destroy the cedar, you'll destroy yourself." Melania hesitated, his words cutting through her resolve. She glanced at the machine, then back at Victor. "Maybe that's a risk I'm willing to take," she said. With a final surge of determination, she pulled the machine's core from its housing. The lab erupted in a blinding flash of light, and then the light consumed everything, pulling Melania into an abyss where time seemed to fold in on itself. She felt disoriented, her body weightless, as fragments of memories and moments, some hers, others foreign, whirled past her like a hurricane. Voices echoed in her mind, overlapping and incoherent, cries of despair, whispers of love, shouts of anger. And then, silence. Melania awoke to find herself lying on a cold, featureless surface. The world around her was a swirling void of light and shadow, as if she were caught between realities. In the distance, she saw a figure emerging from the haze. But this version of Melania was different. She exuded a confidence and power that felt alien, almost menacing. Her doppelganger regarded her with a cold smile. "You've made a mess of things," the other Melania said, her voice echoing unnaturally. "But I suppose I should thank you. Without your meddling, I wouldn't exist." "What are you?" Melania asked, struggling to her feet. "I am the result of your actions," the doppelganger replied. "Every time you altered the timeline, you created fractures, possibilities that shouldn't have existed. I am one of those possibilities, a version of you forged in a world of power and control." Melania's heart sank as the truth hit her. "You're a dictator." The doppelganger laughed, a chilling sound. Dictator? No. Visionary. Leader. Savior, even. In my timeline, the chaos you created gave me the opportunity to rise. I unified nations under a single banner. Yes, there were sacrifices, but isn't that the cost of greatness? Melania shook her head, her anger flaring. You've twisted everything. I never wanted this. Wanting doesn't matter, the doppelganger said, stepping closer. What matters is that you acted. And now, you're too weak to fix it. Before Melania could respond, the void around them began to destabilize. The fractures in time were growing, ripping through the fabric of reality itself. The doppelganger glanced around, her expression unreadable. It seems our little experiment is unraveling, she said. The cedar's destruction disrupted the flow of time. Soon, this entire existence will collapse. Melania felt a surge of desperation. There has to be a way to stop it. There is, the doppelganger said. But it will come at a cost. You, the doppelganger replied simply. The cedar's anchor. You're the linchpin holding these fractures together. If you sever your connection, the timeline will reset. Everything will go back to the way it was before Victor's meddling. But you'll cease to exist. Melania's breath caught. The thought of erasing herself from existence was terrifying. But could she live with herself if she let the world suffer because of her actions? You have to choose, the doppelganger said. Save yourself, or save the world. Melania closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. She thought of her family, her friends, the life she had dreamed of living. But she also thought of the lives she had inadvertently destroyed, the chaos she had unleashed. I can't let this continue, she whispered. With trembling hands, she reached out toward the swirling light of the void, feeling its energy course through her. The doppelganger watched, her expression unreadable. Brave, the doppelganger said softly. Foolish, but brave. As Melania connected with the energy, the void exploded in a cascade of light and sound. She felt herself dissolving, her memories fading like sand slipping through her fingers. When the light faded, the world was quiet. The timeline had been restored, the events of Victor's experiment erased from history. The University of Ljubljana stood unchanged, its students going about their lives as if nothing had happened. Viktor Stranov's lab was empty, his research forgotten. And somewhere, in the fabric of time itself, a faint echo of Melania remained, a whisper, a shadow, a reminder of the sacrifice she had made. Life went on, and the world continued to turn. Years later, a young woman studying history stumbled upon an old photograph in the university archives. It showed a group of students standing in front of the library, smiling at the camera. But one face stood out, a striking young woman with piercing eyes and a faint, knowing smile. The student turned the photograph over, reading the names scrawled on the back. One name caught her attention, Melania Trump. Who was she? The student wondered aloud. No one could answer. Melania had become a ghost in history, her story lost to time. But in the faintest corners of reality, her presence lingered, a quiet guardian watching over the timeline she had saved. Unbeknownst to the young historian, the story didn't end there. While Melania's physical presence had been erased, traces of her influence still lingered, woven into the fabric of time. These echoes manifested as subtle changes, a peculiar phrase in a historical document, an inexplicable shift in a famous painting, or the way certain events seemed to inexplicably align for the better. One such trace lay in the hands of Viktor Stranov. Though Melania had destroyed the cedar, Viktor survived the collapse of time, but not unscathed. He retained fragmented memories of the experiments, moments that haunted him like fragments of a broken mirror. Desperate to reclaim what was lost, Viktor began rebuilding his research, this time with a greater understanding of the consequences. But there was one thing he couldn't replicate, Melania. Her unique connection to the cedar had been the key to its success, and without her, Victor's progress stalled. He became obsessed with finding her, convinced that her essence, her anchor, might still exist somewhere in the timeline. Decades later, in a quiet Slovenian village, a group of scholars known as the Guardians of Time uncovered Victor's forgotten research. The Guardians were a secretive organization dedicated to preserving the integrity of the timeline, believing that history should unfold naturally, free from manipulation. Among their ranks was a woman named Anna, a brilliant physicist with a sharp mind and a deep curiosity about the mysteries of time. She stumbled upon Victor's notes in an old university archive, tucked away in a forgotten corner. The notes mentioned Melania by name, describing her as the anchor and detailing her pivotal role in the cedar experiments. Anna couldn't shake the feeling that Melania's story wasn't over. Guided by the fragmented clues in Victor's notes, Anna and the Guardians began piecing together the remnants of Melania's timeline. Their search led them across continents, from forgotten libraries in Europe to abandoned Cold War research facilities in the United States. Along the way, they encountered strange phenomena, anomalies in historical records, inexplicable coincidences, and even artifacts that seemed out of place. One of these artifacts was a journal, its pages filled with entries written in Melania's handwriting. The entries were cryptic, describing dreams of a fractured world and warnings about the dangers of altering time. But one entry stood out. "If you find this, know that I chose to sacrifice myself for the greater good. But perhaps, not all of me was lost." Anna's heart raced as she read the words. Could Melania still exist in some form? The Guardians eventually traced the echoes of Melania's presence to a remote cave in Slovenia, where ancient symbols adorned the walls. At the cave's center stood a pedestal, its surface engraved with a glowing pattern that pulsed faintly, as if alive. Anna stepped forward, placing her hand on the pedestal. The moment she made contact, a wave of energy surged through the cave, and a voice filled the air. "You've come far," the voice said, soft yet powerful. "I am what remains of her," the voice replied. A fragment, a memory, preserved in the threads of time. The Guardians watched in awe as a translucent figure materialized before them, a shimmering image of Melania, her expression serene. "You risked everything to save the timeline," Anna said, her voice trembling. "Why are you still here?" Melania's ghostly form smiled faintly. "Because time is never truly fixed. It's a river, constantly flowing and shifting. My sacrifice was not the end, it was a beginning. I am here to ensure that the mistakes of the past are not repeated." Anna nodded, understanding the weight of Melania's words. "What can we do?" "Guard the timeline," Melania said. "Protect it from those who would seek to control it. And remember, every choice matters." With that, her form began to fade, leaving behind only the faint glow of the pedestal. The Guardians of Time took Melania's words to heart, dedicating their lives to preserving the natural flow of history. Her sacrifice became their guiding principle, a reminder of the cost of tampering with the delicate balance of existence. And though Melania was gone, her legacy endured, an unseen force quietly shaping the world for the better, ensuring that humanity's destiny remained its own. In the end, she became more than just a figure in history. She became a guardian of time itself. Years turned into decades, and the Guardians of Time grew into an expansive network of historians, physicists, philosophers, and adventurers who dedicated themselves to monitoring temporal anomalies and safeguarding history. They operated in the shadows, unknown to the world, but their influence was undeniable. The pedestal in the Slovenian cave, which they came to call the Anchor Stone, became a sacred site for the Guardians. They realized it wasn't just a relic of Melania's sacrifice, it was a conduit, a nexus where the boundaries of time were weakest. The Guardians established their headquarters nearby, constructing an underground facility where they could study the stone and its connection to Melania's essence. One day, while conducting experiments, Anna and her team discovered something extraordinary. When activated with the right harmonic frequency, the anchor stone emitted pulses that aligned with specific historical events. These pulses were like beacons, highlighting critical moments where history was at risk of being altered. The Guardians called these events temporal inflection points, moments where the timeline could diverge, leading to potentially catastrophic outcomes. The first major inflection point detected by the anchor stone occurred in the year 2027. A wealthy tech magnate named Cyrus Vale had acquired a piece of Viktor Stranov's research and was secretly attempting to rebuild the Chrono Cedar. His goal wasn't just to alter history but to create a loop where he could repeatedly relive his successes, eliminating all his failures. The Guardians knew they had to intervene. Anna led the mission, accompanied by a team of operatives trained in stealth, technology, and diplomacy. They infiltrated Vale's heavily guarded facility in Silicon Valley, navigating state-of-the-art security systems and encountering resistance at every turn. When they finally reached the reconstructed Cedar, Anna felt a pang of déjà vu. The machine hummed with a familiar energy, its design hauntingly similar to Victor's original creation. "Shut it down," she ordered. As her team worked to dismantle the device, Vale appeared, flanked by armed guards. "You have no idea what you're tampering with," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "We know exactly what this is," Anna shot back. "And we know what happens when someone tries to play God with time." Vale smirked. "Then you know it's unstoppable. I've perfected what Stranov couldn't. The Cedar is no longer limited by anchors or biological connections. It's fully automated." Anna's heart sank. If Vale's claims were true, his machine could operate without the limitations that had made Melania's sacrifice possible. It would be a perpetual engine of temporal chaos. But Anna wasn't about to give up. "You might have perfected the machine," she said, stepping forward, "but you don't understand the consequences. Every alteration fractures reality, creating instability that could collapse the entire timeline. Are you willing to risk everything for your own ego?" Vale hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Anna pressed. "The anomalies. The glitches in reality. That's the universe warning you. Stop this, or you'll destroy us all." For a moment, it seemed like Vale might listen. But then he shook his head, his expression hardening. "I'll take that risk." The unexpected ally. As Vale activated the Cedar, the room filled with a blinding light. Anna braced herself for the worst, but before the machine could fully power up, the anchor stone, which Anna's team had brought as a failsafe, emitted a pulse of energy. To everyone's shock, the pulse materialized a spectral figure in the center of the room. It was Melania. Her translucent form radiated authority as she turned to Vale. "Stop this madness," she commanded, her voice resonating with power. Vale staggered backward, his confidence shattered. What are you?" "I am the Guardian of Time," Melania said, stepping closer. "And I will not let you destroy the balance." The room trembled as Melania raised her hand. The Cedar's energy began to dissipate, its lights flickering as if responding to her will. "You don't understand what you're meddling with," she said, her voice softer now, almost sorrowful. "I gave up everything to protect this timeline. Don't make me do it again." Vale dropped to his knees, overwhelmed by her presence. Anna seized the opportunity, motioning for her team to dismantle the Cedar completely. Within minutes, the machine was reduced to a pile of inert components. As the Guardians secured Vale and his research, Melania's form began to fade. Anna stepped forward, her eyes filled with gratitude and sorrow. "Will we see you again?" she asked. Melania smiled faintly. "Perhaps. My time here is limited, but as long as you protect the timeline, my sacrifice will not have been in vain." Before disappearing completely, Melania placed a hand on Anna's shoulder. "Remember," she said, "every choice ripples through eternity." And with that, she was gone. The Guardians continued their work, inspired by Melania's legacy. They remained vigilant, monitoring the timeline for new inflection points and stopping those who sought to exploit the flow of time. Though Melania's presence was fleeting, her influence endured. She became a symbol of sacrifice, resilience, and the power of choice, a reminder that even in the vast expanse of time, a single person could make all the difference. And somewhere, in the unseen fabric of the universe, her spirit remained, watching over the timeline she had fought so hard to protect. The Guardians of Time grew into a global network, spanning generations of scholars, scientists, and adventurers. Each new member was sworn to uphold the principles of preserving history and protecting the natural flow of time. The group maintained strict secrecy, operating in the shadows to prevent their mission from being compromised. The anchor stone, still resting in the Slovenian cave, became their most sacred artifact. Over time, the Guardians discovered that it not only highlighted temporal inflection points but also occasionally revealed glimpses of possible futures. These visions, though cryptic, helped guide their actions. To honor Melania's sacrifice, the Guardians created a tradition. Every new recruit was taught her story, ensuring that her legacy would never be forgotten. They referred to her as the eternal anchor, a symbol of the balance they fought to maintain. As the Guardians became more adept at monitoring the timeline, they began to uncover evidence of other factions that sought to manipulate history. Some were powerful corporations aiming to secure wealth and influence, others were rogue scientists inspired by Viktor Stranov's research. The most dangerous group, however, called themselves the Chronos Order. The Chronos Order believed that the timeline was a tool to be shaped and controlled. They viewed themselves as the rightful architects of history, willing to erase or rewrite events to create their vision of a perfect world. Their methods were ruthless, their technology advanced, and their reach extensive. It was only a matter of time before the Guardians and the Chronos Order clashed. The first major confrontation between the Guardians and the Chronos Order occurred in the year 2062. The Order had developed a device known as the temporal loom, capable of weaving alternate timelines into the primary one, effectively overwriting history on a massive scale. The Guardians launched a daring mission to infiltrate the Order's base in Antarctica, where the temporal loom was hidden. Anna, now a veteran leader of the Guardians, led the operation herself. The mission was fraught with danger. The Order's base was heavily fortified, protected by both advanced technology and an army of loyal followers. The Guardians used every resource at their disposal, including experimental devices reverse-engineered from Viktor Stranov's research. As Anna and her team fought their way through the base, the anchor stone, carried in a portable containment unit, began to pulse with increasing intensity. Anna realized it was reacting to the temporal loom, drawn to its disruptive energy. In the heart of the base, the Guardians reached the temporal loom, a massive, pulsating machine surrounded by swirling streams of light. The energy emanating from the loom was overwhelming, threatening to tear apart the fabric of reality. As the team prepared to shut it down, the anchor stone emitted a blinding burst of light. From the light, Melania's spectral form emerged once more vivid and powerful than ever. "You've come far," she said, her voice resonating with both strength and warmth. "But this battle is not yet over." Anna stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "Melania, we need your help." Melania nodded. "The loom is a threat unlike any other. If it's allowed to continue, it will unravel everything I gave my life to protect." The Guardians worked quickly, guided by Melania's presence. She showed them how to destabilize the loom's core, using the anchor stone to amplify their efforts. The Order's forces launched a desperate counterattack, but the Guardians held their ground. With Melania's help, they succeeded in overloading the loom, causing it to collapse in on itself. The destruction of the temporal loom marked a turning point in the Guardians' battle against the Chronos Order. Though the Order remained a threat, their power was significantly diminished. The Guardians, bolstered by their victory, redoubled their efforts to protect the timeline. Melania's form faded once more after the loom's destruction, but not before leaving the Guardians with a final message. "Remember," she said, her voice echoing in the chamber, time is fragile. Guard it well. Her words became the Guardians' motto, etched into their minds and hearts as they carried on their mission. As the years passed, the Guardians continued to evolve, incorporating new technologies and recruiting the brightest minds from around the world. They remained vigilant, knowing that the fight to protect time was never truly over. Melania's story became a legend among the Guardians, reminder of the sacrifices required to maintain the balance of history. Though she was gone, her spirit lived on in every action they took, every life they saved, and every moment they preserved. And somewhere, in the infinite expanse of time, her essence remained, an eternal anchor holding the timeline together. The Guardians eventually uncovered the origins of the Chronos Order, buried deep within the classified archives of a forgotten era. The Order's roots traced back to a secretive group of scientists who had worked alongside Viktor Stranov during his early experiments with the chronometer. This group, disillusioned by Viktor's cautious approach and inspired by the possibilities of absolute control over time, splintered off to pursue their ambitions in secrecy. Over decades, they refined their techniques, blending advanced technology with ancient temporal theories. They believed they could eliminate chaos and unpredictability by reshaping history into a utopia of their own design. The Guardians discovered records of their early successes, small manipulations of events that increased their wealth and influence. But these tamperings came at a cost. Each alteration introduced fractures into the timeline, causing unforeseen consequences elsewhere. Among their most catastrophic manipulations was an attempt to erase a pivotal natural disaster in the 22nd century. Though they succeeded, the ripple effects destabilized the environment, resulting in a global famine. It was a chilling reminder of how even well-intentioned changes could spiral out of control. The Guardians realized the Chronos Order wasn't just a threat to history, it was a threat to the very fabric of existence. As the Guardians delved deeper into their conflict with the Order, they learned of a mysterious artifact known as the Relic of Time, rumored to be the source of the Order's most advanced technology. Legends described the relic as a shard of a temporal singularity, imbued with the power to manipulate time on an unprecedented scale. It was said to be the original inspiration for Viktor Stranov's work on the chronometer. The Guardians knew they had to find the relic before the Order could use it to launch their next assault on the timeline. Their search led them to a remote region of Siberia, where ancient ruins hinted at the artifact's location. Anna, now the leader of the Guardians, led the expedition. The team faced treacherous conditions, navigating snowstorms, frozen rivers, and abandoned military installations. But their determination never wavered. Deep within the ruins, they found the relic, a glowing crystalline shard suspended in a field of shimmering energy. Its presence was overwhelming, radiating a sense of both awe and dread. As Anna approached the relic, the anchor stone began to react, emitting pulses that seemed to resonate with the shard. She realized the two were connected, bound by the same temporal forces. But before the Guardians could secure the relic, the Chronos Order arrived. The confrontation in the Siberian ruins was unlike anything the Guardians had faced before. The Chronos Order deployed advanced weapons and temporal disruptors, devices that could slow, accelerate, or rewind time in localized areas. The Guardians fought valiantly, using their training and ingenuity to counter the Order's technology. Anna led the charge, wielding the anchor stone as both a weapon and a shield. As the battle raged, the relic's energy began to surge uncontrollably. The conflicting forces around it destabilized its field, causing waves of temporal distortion to ripple through the ruins. In the chaos, Anna heard a familiar voice. "Focus," Melania's voice whispered, echoing in her mind. Anna closed her eyes, calming herself amidst the turmoil. She understood what she needed to do. With the help of her team, Anna used the anchor stone to stabilize the relic's energy. The two artifacts seemed to harmonize, creating a moment of perfect balance. In that instant, Melania's spectral form appeared once more, radiating an otherworldly light. "This is the end of their reign," Melania said, her voice firm. "But it requires one final sacrifice." Melania explained that the relic's power could be neutralized, but only by merging it with the anchor stone. The process would permanently sever both artifacts from the timeline, eliminating their influence but also erasing the Guardian's ability to directly intervene in temporal anomalies. Anna faced an impossible choice. Without the artifacts, the Guardians would lose their most powerful tools. But if the relic fell into the wrong hands, the consequences would be unimaginable. "I trust you," Melania said, her gaze unwavering. "Do what you know is right." Anna took a deep breath, her heart heavy. She gave the order to merge the artifacts. The moment the two artifacts joined, a blinding light engulfed the ruins. Time itself seemed to freeze as the relic and the anchor stone dissolved into pure energy, their essence absorbed into the timeline. The Chronos order was defeated, their technology rendered inert. The Guardians had won, but at a great cost. In the aftermath of the battle, the Guardians regrouped and redefined their mission. Though they no longer had the anchor stone, they remained committed to protecting history. They relied on their knowledge, resourcefulness, and the lessons Melania had imparted. As for Melania, her essence was no longer tied to the timeline. But her legacy endured, a guiding force that inspired the Guardians to persevere. In the quiet moments, Anna sometimes felt her presence, a whisper, a fleeting shadow, a reminder that even in the vast expanse of time, the actions of one person could ripple through eternity. And so, the Guardians of Time continued their work, knowing that the battle to protect the timeline was never truly over. Though the relic and the anchor stone were merged and absorbed into the timeline, their energy left subtle imprints on reality. These imprints, which the Guardians called temporal echoes, manifested in unexpected ways, glitches in history, strange coincidences, and moments of déjà vu that seemed to carry deeper meaning. The echoes became the Guardians' new compass. Though they no longer had the artifacts to pinpoint inflection points, the echoes offered subtle clues, nudging the Guardians toward moments that required their intervention. One such echo appeared in 2094, in the form of a letter delivered to the Guardians' headquarters in Slovenia. The letter was written in a script that combined multiple languages and time periods, and its message was cryptic. "The thread is fraying. The weaver stirs. Seek the gate beneath the sands." Anna, now retired but serving as an advisor to the Guardians, immediately recognized the significance of the message. She gathered the current leadership and explained its possible meaning. "The weaver," she said, "is a reference to the Chronos order. They're trying to rebuild their power." "And the gate beneath the sands?" one of the younger Guardians asked. Anna nodded gravely. "That could only mean one place, the Lost Archive of Alexandria." The Lost Archive of Alexandria was a legendary repository of knowledge, said to contain secrets from the ancient world, including early theories of time and space. Historians had long debated its existence, but for the Guardians, it was more than a myth. They had found scattered references to the archive in their earlier missions, each hinting at its role in the origins of temporal science. The Guardians mobilized a team to search for the archive, their quest leading them to the shifting sands of the Egyptian desert. Using advanced scanning technology and historical records, they pinpointed a site buried beneath layers of sand and stone. What they uncovered was breathtaking, a vast underground library, its walls lined with ancient scrolls, tablets, and devices far more advanced than anything known from that era. At the heart of the archive, they found a device called the Eternal Dial, a massive mechanism resembling an astrolabe, inscribed with symbols representing time, space, and the cycles of the cosmos. The Eternal Dial appeared dormant, but its design suggested it could manipulate the flow of time in localized areas. The Guardians knew the Chronos order would stop at nothing to obtain it. As the Guardians began securing the archive, they detected the arrival of Chronos order operatives. The order had tracked the Guardians' movements and launched a full-scale assault to claim the Eternal Dial. The Guardians fortified their position, using their knowledge of the archive's layout to gain an advantage. The ensuing battle was intense, with the ancient halls echoing with the sounds of conflict. Amid the chaos, the eternal dial began to activate, its gears turning and its symbols glowing with a faint light. Anna, who had insisted on joining the mission despite her age, realized the device was reacting to the presence of both factions. If the dial activates fully, it could rewrite history, she warned. We can't let that happen. The Guardians fought valiantly to protect the eternal dial, but the Chronos Order's leader, a brilliant and ruthless woman named Celine Voss, managed to breach their defenses. Celine was a former Guardian who had defected to the Order, believing their vision of a controlled timeline was the only way to save humanity from itself. You don't understand the potential here, Celine said, confronting Anna at the base of the dial. With this, we can end war, poverty, and suffering. We can create a perfect world. Anna shook her head. A perfect world at what cost? You've seen what happens when we tamper with time. The timeline isn't ours to control. Celine hesitated, but her resolve didn't waver. She began to manipulate the eternal dial, setting its mechanisms in motion. Desperate to stop her, Anna called on the Guardians to focus their efforts on disabling the device. With no anchor stone or relic to rely on, they had to use their wits and courage. As the eternal dial's energy reached a critical level, Anna made a decision. She instructed the team to overload the device's core, knowing it would destroy the dial, and potentially everyone in its vicinity. I've lived my life for this mission, she said, her voice steady. It's time I finish what we started. The younger Guardians protested, but Anna was resolute. With their help, she planted charges around the dial's core and prepared to trigger the detonation. Celine, realizing what Anna intended, tried to stop her. The two women faced off in a fierce battle, each representing opposing ideologies. In the end, Anna's determination prevailed. As the charges detonated, the eternal dial collapsed in a burst of energy, its power dissipating into the sands. The Chronos Order's operatives retreated, their leader defeated and their plans in ruins. Anna's sacrifice marked the end of an era for the Guardians, but her legacy inspired a new generation to continue the fight. They rebuilt their organization, adapting to a world without the artifacts and relying on their ingenuity and unity. Though the eternal dial was destroyed, the knowledge gained from the lost archive provided new insights into the nature of time. The Guardians used this knowledge to refine their methods, ensuring that they could protect history without the need for dangerous artifacts. And though Anna was gone, her story, like Melania's, became a legend, a reminder of the sacrifices required to safeguard the fragile threads of time. After the destruction of the eternal dial and Anna's sacrifice, the Guardians entered a period of rebuilding and introspection. They had lost two of their most influential leaders, Melania and Anna, but their stories became the foundation for a new era of purpose and determination. The surviving Guardians, now led by a council of experienced members, decided to prioritize adaptability and education. They established training academies worldwide, designed to teach recruits not only the technical skills needed to protect the timeline but also the moral and philosophical principles that defined their mission. Their motto, inspired by Melania's final words, was etched into the walls of every academy: time is fragile. Guard it well. While the Chronos Order was severely weakened, Celine Voss managed to escape the ruins of the Eternal Dial. Injured but unbroken, she retreated to a hidden facility in the Arctic Circle, where remnants of the Order awaited her. Celine knew her defeat at the Eternal Dial was a significant setback, but she refused to abandon her vision. Her resolve only deepened as she analyzed fragments of data recovered from the lost archive. Among the recovered documents, Celine discovered references to a phenomenon called the temporal nexus, a point in time and space where all timelines converged. According to the archive, controlling the nexus would grant unparalleled power over the flow of history. Celine saw the nexus as the ultimate solution to humanity's chaos. With the Guardians distracted by rebuilding, she began to formulate a plan to locate and seize the nexus. The temporal nexus had long been a myth even among the Guardians. Few believed it truly existed, but those who did theorized that it was not a physical location but a state of temporal balance. The Codex of Aeons, an ancient text believed to contain the nexus's coordinates. The chrono lens, a device capable of mapping temporal distortions across the multiverse. The key of eternity, a relic said to unlock the nexus's full potential. Each of these artifacts was thought to be hidden in different parts of the world, protected by layers of secrecy and natural barriers. As Selene pursued the nexus, the Guardians began to notice an increase in temporal echoes. These anomalies hinted at someone tampering with the timeline on a massive scale. One such echo led the Guardians to an ancient temple in the Andes, where they discovered the Codex of Aeons had been stolen. In its place, they found a message written in Selene's cryptic handwriting. "I will finish what you failed to achieve." The Guardians realized they were in a race against time to stop Selene from finding the Nexus. They dispatched teams to search for the remaining artifacts, knowing that Selene would stop at nothing to claim them. The Guardians' search for the chrono lens led them to a hidden vault beneath the ruins of Atlantis. Long thought to be a myth, Atlantis turned out to be a highly advanced civilization that had experimented with temporal technologies before its fall. Navigating the submerged ruins was a perilous task, as the Guardians faced both natural hazards and automated defenses left behind by the Atlanteans. When they finally reached the vault, they found the chrono lens, a crystalline sphere that shimmered with an otherworldly glow. But Selene's forces were already there, waiting in ambush. The ensuing battle was chaotic, as both sides fought for control of the chrono lens. The Guardians managed to secure the artifact, but at great cost. Several members of the team were lost, and the lens was damaged during their escape. Despite its damage, the lens provided the Guardians with valuable information, a fragment of the Nexus's coordinates. They realized they would need to retrieve the key of eternity to complete the puzzle. The final artifact, the key of eternity, was said to be hidden within a remote monastery in the Himalayas. The monastery's monks, descendants of an ancient order, had safeguarded the key for generations, believing it to be a divine object. The Guardians approached the monastery with respect, explaining their mission and the threat posed by Selene. The monks, after much deliberation, agreed to show them the key. The key of eternity was a small, intricately carved object made of a strange, luminous material. Its surface pulsed faintly, as if alive with energy. But before the Guardians could secure the key, Selene arrived, leading a strike team. The battle for the key of eternity was the most intense confrontation between the Guardians and the Chronos Order. The remote monastery became a war zone, with both sides fighting desperately to claim the artifact. In the chaos, Selene managed to seize the key and escape, leaving the Guardians with no choice but to regroup and prepare for a final confrontation at the Nexus itself. With the key of eternity in Selene's possession, the Guardians had no time to lose. The fragments of the Nexus coordinates had led them to a remote island in the Pacific Ocean, an area that had long been considered a geographical anomaly. The island, shrouded in a permanent storm, was rumored to be the location of the temporal nexus, a place where the very fabric of time and space was said to converge. As the Guardians gathered their forces, they knew that this would be their final stand. The outcome of this battle would decide the fate of the timeline itself. They had learned over the years that controlling time was a dangerous game, and Selene's obsession with achieving her perfect world could unravel everything. Anna's legacy had inspired them, but now, the burden of her sacrifice weighed heavily on their shoulders. The team was smaller, yet stronger, forged through years of struggle and loss. And now, they were about to face the woman who had once been one of their own. The Guardians arrived on the island, their faces set with grim determination. The sky above them was a swirling vortex of clouds, crackling with temporal energy. Lightning flashed in unnatural patterns, and the air was thick with the hum of unstable energy. The temporal nexus was alive, pulsing with an ancient, primal force. Selene and her followers were already there, standing before an enormous stone gateway, inscribed with symbols that seemed to shift and change with every glance. At the center of the gate was a swirling vortex of light, a portal that beckoned all who approached it. Selene, with the key of eternity in hand, was standing directly in front of the portal, her eyes alight with a mix of triumph and madness. "You're too late," Selene called out as the guardians approached. Her voice carried over the winds, cold and mocking. "The Nexus is within my grasp. Once I unlock it, I will reshape time itself. No more chaos. No more suffering. You can't control it, Selene." Anna's closest friend, Lucas, shouted. His voice rang with the desperation of knowing just how dangerous Selene had become. "You'll destroy everything." Selene's eyes narrowed as she inserted the key of eternity into the portal. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the Nexus began to activate, its power swirling outward in waves that distorted the very air. Time itself bent and twisted around them. For a moment, everything stood still. The Guardians could feel the weight of the timeline, the pressure of the universe's delicate balance, pushing against them. As Selene turned the key, the portal flared with an intense burst of light. The storm overhead became more violent, the winds howling with increasing fury. For a brief second, the Guardians were blinded by the brilliance of the portal. When their vision cleared, they saw Selene standing at the center of a shimmering, ever-shifting landscape, her hair and cloak flowing as if suspended in an invisible wind. She had unlocked the temporal nexus. The gateway pulsed with energy, and the very fabric of time seemed to unravel. Waves of past, present, and future collided in chaotic spirals, twisting the reality around them. The island, the sea, and the sky were all merging into a single, uncontrollable maelstrom of temporal distortions. Selene turned to face the Guardians, her smile one of pure madness. "Look at what I've done. I've broken free from the chains of linear time. Now, I will remake the world as I see fit." But as the energy from the Nexus began to pour forth, something unexpected happened. The power of the temporal nexus started to destabilize, and Selene's control over it began to waver. The key of eternity was not a weapon, it was a trigger, and without the balance of the anchor stone and the relic of time, its power was too volatile for a single person to control. Seeing that Selene's grip on the nexus was weakening, Anna and the remaining Guardians made their move. They charged toward the portal, determined to stop Selene before she could irrevocably alter the fabric of time. But the distortions were too powerful, every step they took felt like wading through thick fog, their bodies and minds disoriented by the twisting timelines. Then, as the energy from the nexus grew more intense, Anna realized what she had to do. She had to act quickly, before the nexus tore everything apart. The memory of Melania's guidance and the lessons from her own experiences flashed through her mind. Without hesitation, Anna sprinted toward Selene, the last of her strength guiding her as she fought through the distorting winds. Reaching the center of the vortex, she seized the key of eternity from Selene's hands, wrenching it free. "No!" Selene screamed, but it was too late. In one final, desperate act, Anna plunged the key back into the heart of the nexus. As soon as she did, the power of the nexus surged, pulling Anna into its core. The ground beneath her feet disappeared, and she was suspended in a swirling maelstrom of light and shadow. She could feel the weight of history, the infinite possibilities, and the unbearable pressure of timelines colliding. But within the chaos, Anna knew one thing: she had to end it. The timelines could not be controlled, and the nexus itself had to be sealed forever. In a final act of will, Anna activated the key of eternity, using the last of her energy to stabilize the nexus. The world exploded in light. When the light faded, the island was gone. The storm, the shifting vortex, and with the temporal nexus sealed and the immediate threat from the Chronos order eradicated, the Guardians knew that their work was far from over. While Selene and her followers had been defeated, the potential for others to emerge, seeking to manipulate the flow of time, remained a constant threat. The Guardians had learned the hard way that the fabric of time was fragile, and one misstep could unravel everything. In the months that followed, the Guardians refocused their mission. The loss of Anna was a somber reminder of the risks involved, but her actions had shown them the true cost of failing to protect time. Each member of the Guardians dedicated themselves to a singular goal, to ensure that no one would ever again have the ability to control or manipulate the timeline. The Guardians' leadership structure was reorganized, creating a council of trusted members who would oversee operations, recruit new members, and ensure the continuity of their mission. Each member of the council had a unique specialty, and together they formed a collective knowledge that no individual could possess alone. Lucas, Anna's closest ally and a veteran Guardian, was appointed the new leader of the council. He had grown both emotionally and intellectually over the years, and the responsibility he now bore weighed heavily on him. But he was determined to honor Anna's sacrifice and keep the legacy of the Guardians alive. Under his leadership, the Guardians would expand their scope. They would not only focus on safeguarding the timeline but also work to educate the world on the dangers of temporal manipulation. They would build alliances with scientific communities, historical institutions, and even governments, ensuring that the lessons learned from the destruction of the temporal nexus would be passed on to future generations. While the Guardians were rebuilding, something ominous began to stir on the fringes of time. Though the nexus had been sealed, the energy it had released was not entirely extinguished. The Guardians' victory had caused a ripple in the temporal fabric, one that was more subtle than anything they had encountered before. It was a shadow moving through time itself, an entity that had been dormant for centuries, perhaps millennia. The first indication of this new threat came in the form of strange anomalies, small, seemingly unimportant events that would ripple outward, creating fractures in time. A historic building would suddenly appear in the wrong century, or a figure from history would vanish without explanation, their existence erased. The Guardians began to suspect that the disturbance was tied to an ancient force, one that predated even the Chronos order. It was a force older than the temporal nexus itself, a primordial energy that existed before the concept of time as they knew it. The Guardians would have to confront this new adversary, a force beyond their understanding, and one that threatened not just the timeline but the very nature of existence. In the midst of these growing anomalies, the Guardians received an unexpected message. It was from an old ally, an archaeologist and former Guardian named Rhea. She had uncovered a clue that pointed to the possible return of the relic of time, the artifact that had once been the source of so much power. Rhea's message was urgent, warning the Guardians that the relic might have been pulled from the timeline, its power shifted to a distant epoch. She theorized that the ancient force, something she had come to call the Eternity Pulse, was actively seeking the relic to restore itself to full strength. The Guardians, now determined to prevent another catastrophe, mobilized quickly. They knew they could not afford to underestimate this new enemy. They prepared a team to travel through different eras, tracing the ripple of the Eternity Pulse to its source. Their mission was clear: retrieve the relic before the Eternity Pulse could use it to rewrite reality itself. The mission took the Guardians to some of the most pivotal moments in history, moments that were barely recorded, if at all. They traversed time with caution, using the most sophisticated methods available to track anomalies and prevent any disruption in the timeline. Their first stop was ancient Egypt, where the relic's influence had once been felt. The Guardians found themselves in the midst of a pyramid construction site, surrounded by strange artifacts and signs that suggested a deeper connection between the relic and the ancient Egyptian priests who had once worshipped time itself. The team discovered an underground chamber, untouched by time, where the relic had been kept hidden. But just as they were about to secure the artifact, the Eternity Pulse revealed itself. It was a being, not human, but something older, its form shifting like smoke, its presence bending the very air around them. The creature spoke, its voice echoing in the Guardians' minds. "You are too late. The relic has already chosen me." The Eternity Pulse, as the Guardians soon learned, was not a force but a consciousness, a being that existed outside the conventional flow of time. It was born from the chaos that existed before the creation of the timeline, an entity that had been trapped in the primordial void before time itself had been structured. This entity had existed in the gaps between moments, feeding on the instability in time's fabric. Over the centuries, the pulse had learned to manipulate time in subtle ways, creating ripples that affected the course of history. But it could not act directly. It needed the relic of time to fully manifest, to gain control over the flow of time and rewrite existence itself. Once the relic is mine, the eternity pulse continued, I will reforge time in my image. I will bring about an age where time has no master, an age of infinite possibility, where all things are one. The Guardians realized the severity of their situation. They had to stop the eternity pulse before it could harness the relic's power. But to do so, they would need to understand the true nature of the pulse and how it could be defeated. The battle between the Guardians and the eternity pulse raged through the shifting sands of Egypt, the very air warping with the intensity of the confrontation. The pulse's power was unlike anything they had faced before. Time itself seemed to bend around it, moments slipping into one another, distorting reality. Lucas, leading the team, realized that the only way to defeat the pulse was to sever its connection to time. But doing so would require an ultimate sacrifice. The relic of time had to be destroyed, and with it, the Guardian's ability to control the timeline. The decision was excruciating. But the Guardians knew that if they allowed the pulse to gain control, it would be the end of everything they had fought for. They gathered around the relic, preparing for their final act. The air crackled with tension as the Guardians stood before the relic of time. Its power pulsed, shimmering with an otherworldly glow. The eternity pulse, now fully manifested, floated before them, its form shifting like a living storm, made up of raw energy in timeless matter. It gazed at the Guardians, its voice a low, almost hypnotic hum that reverberated through their minds. You cannot defeat me, it said, its voice unsettling and vast. I was born before time itself. You are mere mortals, bound by the limits of your perception. I will bend the timeline to my will. Lucas, standing at the front of the group, gripped the relic tightly. He knew what had to be done. The sacrifice was inevitable. If they failed, the pulse would rewrite all of existence, erasing the past, present, and future in a single moment. We won't let that happen, Lucas said, his voice steady despite the weight of the decision. He turned to the rest of the Guardians. It's time to end this. We have to destroy the relic. We can't allow it to fall into its hands. But just as he made his move toward the relic, the eternity pulse raised its hand, and the world around them seemed to fracture. Time twisted in impossible ways, moments of the past and future collided, creating a blur of chaotic energy. The ground beneath them split open, and the sky above them turned into a swirling vortex, pulling them toward the center. The pulse laughed, a sound that sent chills down their spines. You are fools. Time is mine to command. You cannot destroy what has always been. Lucas knew they couldn't afford to hesitate. He made a desperate decision. Grabbing the relic, he called out to the Guardians. Get ready. I need your help. Together, we can destroy the relic and sever its connection to the pulse. The Guardians, understanding the gravity of the moment, gathered around Lucas. Each of them placed a hand on the relic, their combined energy focusing on the task at hand. The relic began to hum, vibrating with an increasing intensity as the Guardians poured their will into it. The eternity pulse sensed what was happening and intensified its assault. Time fractured around them, the past and future bleeding into the present. The landscape shifted erratically, buildings appearing and disappearing in flashes, people and events from different eras crossing in chaotic collisions. But the Guardians held firm, their resolve unshaken. With one final push of energy, Lucas and the Guardians focused their combined strength into the relic. The power surged through them, and with an earth-shattering explosion, the relic shattered. As the relic broke apart, a wave of energy rippled outward, engulfing everything in its path. The eternity pulse screamed in agony, its form destabilizing as the power of the shattered relic tore at its very existence. The pulse fought back, but it was no match for the combined strength of the Guardians. With a final, agonizing cry, the eternity pulse unraveled. Its form collapsed into a singularity of raw energy before being erased from existence. Time itself seemed to breathe a sigh of relief as the warping and fracturing began to subside. The Guardians collapsed to the ground, exhausted and battered by the intense strain of the battle. They had done it. The eternity pulse was gone, and the timeline was safe, for now. But the cost of their victory had been immeasurable. The destruction of the relic had severed their connection to time, eliminating their ability to directly manipulate or protect it. The Guardians had made the ultimate sacrifice, not only to save time but to ensure that no one, including themselves, could ever wield its power again. A new beginning, the Guardians without time. In the aftermath, the Guardians were left with a difficult choice. Without the relic, they could no longer use their advanced technology or temporal abilities to safeguard the timeline. The world would continue without their direct influence. However, they had a new mission, a more personal one. Lucas, now the unofficial leader of the remaining Guardians, gathered them to discuss their next steps. "We've done what we had to do," he said, his voice steady but tinged with sorrow. "We've sealed the eternity pulse and destroyed the relic. But now, we must live without the power we once had. We've lost the ability to protect time directly, but our work isn't over. We need to become something new." The Guardians looked at each other, their faces weary but resolute. They had given everything to protect the timeline, but they knew that they had to adapt. They couldn't change history anymore, but they could teach others to protect it, to understand its fragility. Rhea, the archaeologist who had helped them find the relic, stood up and spoke. "We've learned so much over the years. But we've also learned that time isn't something that can be controlled, it's something to be respected. We'll use what we know to educate the world, to build institutions that can protect history without the need for manipulation." The Guardians agreed. They would turn their attention to preserving knowledge and guiding future generations. They would create an organization dedicated to studying history, understanding the true nature of time, and educating the public on its importance. And as for the timeline itself, it would continue to unfold. The Guardians had given everything to ensure that it remained intact. But time, as always, was a living thing. It would continue to evolve and change, unaffected by the hands of those who sought to control it. The Guardians returned to their roots, no longer acting as manipulators of time but as stewards of its memory. They worked tirelessly to preserve historical sites, study ancient texts, and maintain the balance between progress and the preservation of the past. They ensured that history would be remembered as it truly was, without interference or distortion. The world, though still unaware of the true sacrifices made to protect it, began to notice subtle shifts in the way people viewed time. The knowledge of the Guardians, shared through universities, archives, and cultural institutions, began to inspire new generations to value history and its role in shaping the present and future. As for the Guardians themselves, they became legends, figures of myth and mystery, with no official record of their existence, save for the stories passed down through the centuries. Their names were spoken only in hushed reverence, as those who knew the truth of their sacrifice honored them in their own way. The world would move forward, guided by the lessons of the past and the hope that time, in all its complexity, would never again be manipulated for selfish gain. The Guardians had ensured that, in the end, time was a force for the greater good, not to be controlled, but to be respected and protected by those who understood its true power. Years passed, and the world slowly adapted to the new reality the Guardians had left behind. The once mighty organization, capable of shaping and protecting time, had become an elusive myth. Yet, the teachings and knowledge they had passed on had begun to take root in society. People began to realize the importance of preserving history and respecting the timeline's delicate balance. The first true signs of change appeared within academic circles. A global movement emerged, known as the Chrono Foundation, a network of historians, scientists, and philosophers dedicated to understanding time, not as something to be controlled, but as something to be understood and respected. The Foundation's members adhered to strict ethical codes, ensuring that any attempts to alter history or the natural flow of time would be met with severe consequences. At the heart of this movement were the teachings of the Guardians. The relic of their mission, their knowledge, and their wisdom was preserved in ancient manuscripts that were unearthed in hidden archives, long since forgotten by the public. These manuscripts, written by the Guardians themselves, outlined everything they had learned about time, the dangers of manipulation, and the sacrifices they made to protect the timeline. The foundation of the Guardians' work became a beacon of knowledge and guidance for a new generation. Lucas, Rhea, and the others had passed on their teachings to a select few, ensuring that those who followed in their footsteps could carry their legacy forward. Though the Guardians no longer had the power to manipulate time directly, their influence remained in the hands of those who followed the path they had laid. But time, as always, had a way of shifting. As the centuries wore on, the stories of the original Guardians faded into myth. The Chrono Foundation flourished, and the academic community began to study time as a science, but there were those who remembered the old ways, the hidden ones who still carried the knowledge of the original Guardians. These were the new Guardians of Time, a secret group formed by the few who still held the ancient texts and who understood that the timeline, while no longer manipulable, could still be threatened by those who wished to rewrite history. These hidden Guardians worked quietly, observing the world and ensuring that no one would attempt to undo the great sacrifice made by the original team. Their presence was unknown to the general public, but their influence stretched through every part of society, through the institutions of power, the halls of academia, and the corridors of history. They had sworn an oath to protect the timeline, to ensure that it was never again disrupted by those who sought to change it for their own gain. As the modern world moved forward, there were whispers of an old enemy reawakening. The Chronos Order, once thought to be vanquished with the fall of Selene, had not been entirely erased from existence. Fragments of the organization had survived in the shadows, biding their time, waiting for the moment when they could rise again. The remnants of the order, though weakened, had spent decades plotting their return. The destruction of the temporal nexus had not been enough to stop them. They had learned from their past mistakes and had found a new way to manipulate the very fabric of time, by manipulating the minds of those who held the power to reshape history, through covert influence rather than outright control. They began to infiltrate political systems, corporations, and even the foundations of scientific institutions. Their goal was simple: to gather enough power to unearth the temporal nexus once more and use its fragments to rewrite time. The hidden Guardians, aware of these developments, knew that they had to act swiftly to prevent the Chronos Order from succeeding. But they also understood that they could no longer rely on the tools of the past. The relic, the key of eternity, and the manipulation of time itself were gone forever. The new Guardians had to confront the threat head-on, using their knowledge and understanding of time to thwart the Order's attempts without violating the sacred principles they had sworn to uphold. The hidden Guardians launched a counter-operation. It was unlike any battle they had fought before. This time, it wasn't a matter of direct confrontation. It was a battle of influence, of maneuvering behind the scenes, carefully and subtly guiding events so that the Chronos Order would never find a foothold strong enough to alter the course of history. Lucas, now an elder figure in the world of time preservation, had become a figurehead for this movement. He had long since passed the mantle of leadership to a younger generation, but his wisdom and experience were invaluable. He had trained a new generation of Guardians, teaching them how to navigate the complexities of time without ever directly manipulating it. Instead, they used their knowledge of history, the natural progression of events, and their understanding of cause and effect to subtly nudge things in the right direction. The battle was fought on multiple fronts. At one level, it was a political struggle, as the hidden Guardians sought to expose the Chronos Order's machinations and thwart their attempts to infiltrate powerful institutions. At another level, it was an intellectual war, trying to convince key figures in the scientific community and the public of the dangers of temporal manipulation and the ethical responsibility that came with understanding time. The Chronos Order, however, was relentless. They had learned the importance of patience, and they knew that they could not challenge the Guardians head-on. Instead, they slowly began to influence the minds of the most powerful individuals in the world, planting seeds of doubt and ambition, waiting for the right moment to strike. But the Guardians had one final weapon at their disposal, the truth. They knew that the greatest threat to the Chronos Order was the story of the Guardians' sacrifice, their willingness to give up the ability to manipulate time for the greater good. It was a story that could inspire the world, a reminder of the dangers of tampering with the natural order of things. As the battle continued to unfold, the new Guardians realized something fundamental: they didn't need the power to control time. They had something far more powerful, the ability to educate, to inspire, and to preserve the lessons of the past. They were the stewards of history, and by understanding it, they could ensure that no one would ever again make the same mistakes. Their mission was no longer just about protecting the timeline, it was about ensuring that humanity would never lose sight of the lessons they had learned. They were no longer heroes in the traditional sense, wielding power to change the future. They were the silent guardians, the keepers of truth and memory, ensuring that the timeline was respected by those who came after them. The Chronos Order, despite their best efforts, could never defeat the Guardians' legacy. They could not erase the lessons of sacrifice and responsibility that the Guardians had left behind. Over time, the world began to embrace the teachings of the Guardians, realizing that the most important thing wasn't controlling time, it was respecting it. And so, the story of the Guardians, both the original team and the new generation that had carried on their work, became a legend. A legend that reminded the world of the true cost of manipulating time and the immense responsibility that came with it. A story that would inspire future generations to protect the timeline, not as something to be controlled, but as something to be preserved. While the Guardians' influence had begun to shape the future in positive ways, the Chronos Order refused to disappear into the annals of history. The remnants of their once mighty organization, though scattered and fragmented, had learned to adapt to the changing world. The key to their survival lay not in the brute force of temporal manipulation, but in the subtle, insidious nature of their schemes. The Order had become experts in exploiting the vulnerabilities of modern society, technology, politics, and the human psyche. They understood that the manipulation of time was not always about direct interference, it was often about planting ideas, sowing discord, and waiting for the opportune moment to strike. Their goal had never really changed, they sought to unravel the timeline itself, to reshape history according to their own vision of order. But unlike before, they knew that they could no longer rely on ancient relics or forbidden technology to achieve their ends. Instead, they turned to the very systems that govern the modern world, governments, corporations, and the media, using these tools to influence the course of events. In the 21st century, the Chronos Order's influence began to manifest in unexpected ways. They took advantage of the rapid advancements in artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and global communication networks to subtly alter the course of events. Their methods were carefully designed to go unnoticed by the public, manipulating the world in ways that were nearly impossible to trace. For example, the Order infiltrated the world of academia and technology, funneling funds and resources into research that seemed harmless but was, in fact, a step toward reawakening the very powers they had once sought. They secretly funded AI projects with the potential to predict and, in some cases, even influence future events by analyzing patterns in historical data. They also sought to plant key individuals in positions of power, politicians, CEOs, influential thought leaders, who would unknowingly serve the Order's agenda. By controlling these figures, the Chronos Order could steer the course of history in subtle ways, influencing policies and decisions that had far-reaching consequences. The rise of digital currencies, social media, and surveillance technology provided the perfect cover for the Order's covert operations. They manipulated public sentiment, creating divisions and distractions, knowing that as long as society was divided, they would have the freedom to work in the shadows. While the Chronos Order lurked in the shadows, the new generation of Guardians had not remained idle. Though their methods were no longer as direct as before, they had learned from the mistakes of the past and had come to realize the importance of maintaining vigilance. They had trained countless individuals in the ways of preserving history, teaching them to see through the veil of manipulation and recognize the subtle ways in which the timeline could be bent. The Guardians had become more than just timekeepers, they were the champions of truth, advocating for transparency, accountability, and the protection of knowledge. They had founded a network of scholars, activists, and citizens who worked tirelessly to expose the hidden forces trying to manipulate history. Lucas, now an elder statesman in the world of time preservation, continued to lead this effort from behind the scenes. He had retired from the front lines of battle but still advised the younger Guardians, reminding them of the principles that had guided their predecessors. "We may not be able to control time anymore," he said in one of his final speeches to the younger Guardians, "but we can ensure that those who would seek to destroy it never succeed. The most powerful weapon we have is knowledge, truth is our greatest shield." The Guardians had evolved. They no longer wielded the power to alter time, but their wisdom was a force that could not be ignored. They worked through education and influence, sharing their knowledge with the world and ensuring that future generations understood the immense responsibility of living in a universe governed by time. The new Guardians operated in secret, forming a decentralized network that spanned the globe. They worked in the shadows of academia, politics, and culture, quietly thwarting the Chronos Order's schemes and keeping an eye on the fragile balance of time. They used technology to their advantage, employing encrypted communications, hidden databases, and secure channels to share information and collaborate across borders. Their goal was not to defeat the Chronos Order through force, but to expose their manipulation to the world before it was too late. In addition to their covert work, the Guardians began to train new members, individuals who showed promise in understanding the intricate web of history and its connections. They became the next generation of timekeepers, not empowered with the ability to manipulate time, but instead equipped with the knowledge and tools to protect it. The Guardians also established partnerships with global organizations dedicated to preserving cultural heritage and historical accuracy. These organizations, though unaware of the true nature of the Guardians' work, played a crucial role in safeguarding historical artifacts, preventing the distortion of history, and ensuring that future generations would have access to the unaltered truth. The struggle between the Chronos Order and the Guardians entered a new phase, a war of information and influence. No longer could the Order rely on the brute force of temporal manipulation. Instead, they had to use subterfuge, psychology, and technology to achieve their ends. The Guardians, on the other hand, had learned the value of subtlety and indirect action. They understood that to preserve the timeline, they had to prevent those who sought to alter it from succeeding in ways that were not immediately apparent. They used their intelligence networks to keep track of the Order's movements, and through covert operations, they sought to disrupt their plans before they could come to fruition. The battle was fought not in the streets or on battlefields, but in boardrooms, universities, and government offices. The weapons were ideas, and the stakes were higher than ever. The future of humanity itself, and the integrity of history, hung in the balance. As the years wore on, the Guardians realized that the ultimate test was not merely to thwart the Chronos Order's efforts, but to build a society that could never again fall prey to the manipulation of time. They set their sights on a long-term goal, to create a system of education and governance that would prevent the rise of any future organization that sought to alter the course of history. Lucas, now a figure of myth, saw the fruits of their labor beginning to take shape. A new generation of thinkers, philosophers, and activists emerged, people who not only understood the dangers of temporal manipulation, but who were also dedicated to ensuring that it would never again become a threat to the world. "We cannot change the past," Lucas said in his final address to the Guardians, "but we can ensure that the future is one of truth, transparency, and respect for the timeline. The power to alter time is too great for anyone to wield, but the power of knowledge, the power of history, those are forces we can protect." The Guardians' work would never be truly finished. As long as the Chronos Order persisted, there would always be a need for resistance. But the lessons of the past had shown them that even in the face of the greatest threats, the light of truth and the preservation of knowledge would always be their most powerful weapon. The battle between the Chronos Order and the Guardians had reached a critical point. The stakes were no longer just about protecting the timeline, but about ensuring that humanity's future would not be rewritten by those who sought to control it for their own gain. The Guardians, now a network spread across the globe, had become the last line of defense against the dangerous ideologies of the Chronos Order. But the Guardians, unlike their predecessors, had no access to the temporal nexus, no ancient relics to fall back on. Their power was in their knowledge, their understanding of history, and their unwavering commitment to truth. They knew that if they were to defeat the Chronos Order once and for all, they would need to use the tools of the modern world, information, technology, and collective action. The shift in tactics, a war of minds and ideals. In the age of global connectivity, the battle for control of the timeline had evolved into a war of ideas. The Chronos Order, though scattered and fragmented, was still a formidable foe. They had learned the power of manipulation through the media, social networks, and digital surveillance. They could sway public opinion, plant ideas in the minds of influential individuals, and slowly nudge society toward a future that suited their needs. The Guardians, on the other hand, had adapted to this new era. They had become masters of the digital realm, using encrypted communication networks, anonymous data-sharing platforms, and social movements to fight back. The Guardians infiltrated online spaces, carefully crafting narratives that revealed the dangers of temporal manipulation and the importance of preserving history. Through a sophisticated campaign of counterinformation, the Guardians began to awaken the public to the true nature of the Chronos Order's influence. They used their knowledge of history, paired with cutting-edge technology, to expose the Order's secretive operations. Every move the Order made was countered by a wave of public awareness, slowly eroding the Order's ability to remain hidden. The collapse of the Chronos Order. Despite the best efforts of the Chronos Order, their hidden schemes began to unravel. The Guardians had become too skilled at tracking their movements, identifying their operatives, and exposing their plans. The once mighty organization, which had believed itself to be above reproach, was now exposed to the light of day. The Order attempted to reassert control by launching a massive propaganda campaign, seeking to discredit the Guardians and undermine their influence. They used their resources to spread misinformation, casting doubt on the Guardians' motives and trying to turn public opinion against them. But the Guardians had anticipated this, and their counter-campaign was swift and effective. It wasn't just the Guardians who were rising against the Order. The public, too, had begun to rally behind the idea of protecting history. The Chronos Order's manipulation of events, their subtle efforts to rewrite the past, were no longer tolerated. Society had grown tired of being influenced by shadowy forces that sought to control their future. As the Guardians' message spread across the globe, people began to question the motives of those in power. Political leaders, business tycoons, and cultural figures who had been complicit in the Order's machinations were brought to justice. The fight for the preservation of history became a global movement, one that transcended borders and ideologies. The final confrontation, the battle for the future. In the final stages of the war, the Chronos Order made one last attempt to rewrite history. They had uncovered a fragment of the temporal nexus, an artifact that held the potential to alter the flow of time. It was their last hope, a chance to restore their power and reshape the world as they saw fit. The Guardians, now fully aware of the Order's intentions, launched their final operation to prevent the Order from obtaining the artifact. It was a race against time, a battle to stop the Order before they could unleash chaos upon the timeline. Lucas, though old and weakened by years of struggle, took his place as the final guardian of the timeline. He knew that this would be his last stand. The fate of the future rested in his hands, and he was determined not to let the mistakes of the past be repeated. The final confrontation took place in a hidden facility beneath the earth, where the fragment of the temporal nexus was secured. It was here, in the heart of the battle, that the true power of the Guardians' knowledge was revealed. They had no weapons, no advanced technology to rely on. All they had was the truth. The Guardians confronted the remaining leaders of the Chronos Order, exposing their manipulation for all to see. In a battle of words and ideals, the Guardians stood firm, using their knowledge of history to dismantle the Order's arguments and reveal the dangers of their plan. With the world watching, the leaders of the Chronos Order were forced to admit the truth: their attempts to control the timeline had only caused harm. The public, now united against the Order, demanded that they cease their operations and turn over the fragment of the temporal nexus. It was in that moment, as the Order's final leaders were arrested and their plans thwarted, that Lucas realized something profound. The battle for the future was not just about stopping the Chronos Order, it was about creating a world where the timeline was no longer a tool to be controlled, but a reality to be respected. With the fall of the Chronos Order, the Guardians had accomplished what they had set out to do. The timeline was safe. History could no longer be rewritten by those who sought to impose their own vision on the world. But even in victory, the Guardians knew that their work was never truly finished. The world had learned valuable lessons. The knowledge of the dangers of temporal manipulation, the importance of preserving history, and the responsibility that came with understanding time had been passed on to the next generation. The Guardian's legacy was now firmly embedded in the fabric of society. Lucas, having fulfilled his mission, retired from active duty. He passed on the mantle to a new generation of Guardians, confident that they would continue to protect the timeline and ensure that humanity would never again fall victim to the same mistakes. The final act of the Guardians was to establish a global institute, a place where the study of time, history, and its preservation would continue. The Guardians would no longer operate in secrecy, but as an open, respected force for good, ensuring that future generations understood the value of the timeline and the dangers of tampering with it. As the years passed, the Guardians became a symbol of hope, a reminder that, while the power to manipulate time may be too great for any one person or organization to control, the power of knowledge, truth, and collective responsibility could shape a better future for all. And so, the world moved forward, free from the threat of temporal manipulation. The legacy of the Guardians lived on, ensuring that the timeline was preserved for all eternity, an unbroken thread stretching through the past, present, and future. With the collapse of the Chronos Order and the success of the Guardians' mission, the world entered a new era, a period of peace and progress, but also of deep reflection. The future was now in the hands of a new generation that had learned the importance of preserving history, truth, and the very fabric of time itself. The Guardians, no longer operating in secret, became integral to global governance. Their influence spread across every sector: education, politics, science, and culture. The world had come to understand that the preservation of time was not just about stopping those who would manipulate it, but about fostering a society that recognized the value of history, knowledge, and the lessons of the past. The Guardians Global Institute, established in the wake of their victory, became a hub for intellectual and technological advancement. It served as both a research center and a public forum for discussing the ethical implications of time, history, and progress. Here, scholars and philosophers from all over the world gathered to explore how humanity could use its newfound knowledge to shape a future that was built on the lessons of the past. The Guardians' new mission: education and vigilance. While the primary threat of the Chronos Order had been eliminated, the Guardians understood that their mission was far from over. Their role was no longer just to protect the timeline from manipulation, but to ensure that future generations would never forget the dangers of tampering with history. To achieve this, the Guardians launched a global educational initiative. They worked with governments, universities, and cultural institutions to integrate the study of time and history into curricula at every level. Children were taught from a young age the importance of understanding their past, of recognizing how history shaped their present, and of learning how to protect it for the future. The Guardians' educational programs also emphasized critical thinking, teaching students not only about the events that had shaped the world, but about the tools they could use to protect that world from those who would seek to rewrite it. They taught people to question what they were told, to look for hidden motives behind those in power, and to always remember that knowledge is the most powerful weapon against manipulation. In addition to their work in education, the Guardians also established a network of watchful eyes. These timekeepers were trained individuals scattered across the world, dedicated to monitoring any threats to the integrity of history. Though the Chronos order had been defeated, the Guardians knew that the temptation to manipulate time would always exist. These new timekeepers served as both protectors and educators, ensuring that humanity remained vigilant in the face of any future threats. As the years passed, the new generation of Guardians began to take on more active roles within society. These individuals, having grown up in a world shaped by the lessons of the past, were keenly aware of the responsibility they bore. They were no longer fighting against a shadowy organization bent on rewriting time. Instead, they worked to prevent the rise of any future forces that might seek to manipulate history for their own gain. One of the most notable figures in this new generation was Maria, a brilliant historian who had dedicated her life to studying the moments in history that had shaped the modern world. Maria had been raised in the Guardian's educational system, and from a young age, she had shown exceptional promise. Her deep understanding of history and her ability to think critically about the forces that shaped it made her an invaluable asset to the Guardians. Maria's first major assignment was to lead a team of researchers tasked with uncovering the hidden truths behind historical events that had been manipulated or obscured. Her work was groundbreaking, as she uncovered a series of time fractures, small but significant anomalies in the timeline that had been caused by the Chronos order's meddling. These fractures, though seemingly insignificant, had the potential to cause ripples in the present and future. By carefully studying these anomalies, Maria and her team were able to prevent further damage to the timeline, restoring events that had been altered and ensuring that the lessons of history remained intact. Her work became a model for future Guardians, demonstrating how the preservation of history required constant vigilance and dedication. As the Guardians' influence continued to grow, a new form of governance began to take shape. The Guardians Institute evolved into the Council of Time, a unified body that brought together leaders from every corner of the globe. The Council's primary responsibility was to ensure that no future organization, whether political, corporate, or cultural, could manipulate time or rewrite history for their own purposes. The Council's members were chosen based on their knowledge, integrity, and dedication to the ideals of the Guardians. They were not just scholars or politicians, but individuals who had demonstrated a deep understanding of the delicate balance that must be maintained in the world. Their decisions were guided by the principles of truth, transparency, and respect for the past. Under the guidance of the Council, global governments worked together to implement policies that would safeguard history. Laws were enacted to protect historical sites and artifacts, and international treaties were established to ensure that no nation could manipulate or distort the past for their own benefit. The influence of the Guardians had forever altered the trajectory of humanity. The fear of temporal manipulation, once a constant shadow over the world, was gone. The lessons learned from the conflict with the Chronos order were now deeply embedded in society, and people had come to understand the immense responsibility that came with the power to shape the future. Humanity had entered a new age, one defined by a deep respect for history, an understanding of the dangers of tampering with time, and a commitment to safeguarding the integrity of the past, present, and future. The Guardians, once a secretive and mysterious force, were now a respected institution, guiding humanity toward a better, more enlightened future. In this new world, time was no longer something to be controlled or manipulated. It was something to be respected, protected, and celebrated. And the Guardians, the protectors of the timeline, would continue to stand watch, ensuring that the future remained free from those who would seek to rewrite it for their own gain. As time passed and the Guardians' legacy became a cornerstone of global society, an unexpected shift began to occur. Though the world was safer from manipulation, new, more subtle challenge began to rise, one that would test the ideals of the Guardians and the fragile peace they had fought so hard to establish. The very success of the Guardians' education and vigilance programs had created an empowered, aware global population. People were no longer merely passive observers of history, they had become active participants in shaping it. As access to information grew and people began to challenge established systems, a new breed of unseen Guardians emerged. These were individuals who, while not officially part of the council, used their knowledge and influence to ensure that no one could manipulate time, even in small ways. These unseen guardians came from all walks of life: politicians, scientists, teachers, writers, and even everyday citizens who had witnessed the consequences of unchecked power. Their roles were not defined by titles or formal structures, but by the actions they took to protect the integrity of time and the freedom of thought. Among them was Aidan, a brilliant tech entrepreneur who had once been a major player in the world of artificial intelligence. Aidan had long believed that AI could shape a better future, but after witnessing the havoc wreaked by the Chronos Order's manipulation, he realized that even the most well-intentioned technology could be twisted by those with darker motives. Determined to prevent this, Aidan dedicated himself to developing systems that would allow individuals to track and monitor the flow of information, ensuring that no entity could control or alter it for their benefit. Aidan's breakthrough came in the form of a new type of AI, a decentralized network designed not to predict or influence future outcomes, but to safeguard history and truth. This AI, named Vigil, was programmed with an understanding of historical events and ethical principles that would allow it to detect any attempt to manipulate the timeline or alter historical records. It was not a tool for prediction, but a protector of facts, a silent sentinel ensuring that history remained untouched. Despite Aidan's efforts, the rise of the unseen guardians also led to an emerging conflict within society. As the global population became increasingly aware of the dangers of manipulation, they began to question everything: their governments, the media, corporations, and even the information they had been taught in school. The once ironclad trust in historical records began to erode, and people began searching for new, alternative sources of truth. Amidst this growing divide, a new challenge emerged. Historical records, once thought to be immutable, were now increasingly seen as subjective. Though the Guardians had worked tirelessly to preserve and protect history, it became clear that no single narrative could account for the diverse experiences of humanity across time. A new generation, empowered by technology and driven by a desire for justice, began to call for a more inclusive view of history, one that acknowledged the voices of the marginalized and the oppressed. The Guardians, who had always believed in the importance of a singular, objective truth, now found themselves facing a moral dilemma. Was the preservation of history an exercise in maintaining one version of the past, or should history itself be allowed to evolve, shaped by the voices of those who had previously been silenced? It was in this moment of uncertainty that the Guardians realized the limits of their own power. They could preserve history, protect the timeline, and ensure that no one could manipulate the past for personal gain, but they could not control the narratives that would emerge in the future. These narratives, as fragmented and complex as they might be, were part of humanity's journey. The Guardians convened an emergency meeting of the Council of Time, where representatives from every continent, every culture, and every field of expertise gathered to discuss the new challenges facing the world. For the first time, the Council was faced with a profound question: how could they ensure that the future would not repeat the mistakes of the past while also embracing the diverse and evolving stories of humanity? The answer, they realized, was not in maintaining control over history but in ensuring that the guardianship of time remained a collective effort, one that embraced change, diversity, and the complexities of human experience. History, they understood, was not a static record but a living narrative, continuously shaped by the people who lived it. The Guardians' mission would not be to preserve a single, unchanging version of the past, but to safeguard the process of storytelling itself, ensuring that future generations could learn from the past without being bound by it. The New Guardians, a global movement. With this new understanding, the Guardians evolved once again. They no longer operated solely as protectors of the timeline, but as facilitators of a global movement, one dedicated to the idea that history belonged to everyone. The Guardians worked to create spaces where different perspectives could be heard, where people could come together to share their stories and understand the past in new and diverse ways. As the Chronicles movement gained momentum, it sparked a cultural renaissance unlike anything the world had seen before. People from every corner of the globe, regardless of age, nationality, or background, began to share their stories, personal accounts of their lives, their struggles, their triumphs, and their lessons learned. The very essence of human experience, once siloed by borders, languages, and histories, began to coalesce into a shared narrative, revealing the complex web of interconnectedness that bound humanity together. The Guardians, now recognized as stewards of this new era, focused their efforts on ensuring that this global exchange of stories was as inclusive, ethical, and transparent as possible. They built platforms for storytelling that allowed individuals to record and share their experiences, both in written form and through digital media. These stories were not simply academic exercises or dry historical accounts, they were vibrant, living expressions of the human spirit, revealing the depth and diversity of human experience across time. The Guardians Institute, once a place of strict preservation and monitoring of history, transformed into a hub of cultural exchange and global education. It became a place where people from different backgrounds could learn from one another, discuss the implications of history, and collectively shape the future. The Institute's once exclusive role of guardianship now evolved into a global partnership with people everywhere, from artists to scientists, teachers to activists, all working together to ensure that the stories of the past and present would continue to inform and inspire generations to come. As part of this transformation, the Guardians established a new body, the Global Storytellers Council, a group made up of individuals selected from diverse fields such as literature, film, journalism, technology, and education. The purpose of the council was to guide the ethical standards of storytelling in this new era, ensuring that the stories shared within the Chronicles platform were treated with the utmost respect, integrity, and care. The council also worked to prevent misinformation, disinformation, and harmful narratives from taking root, using sophisticated systems developed by the Guardians to monitor the flow of information and ensure that the global conversation remained grounded in truth. The Chronicles did more than just preserve the stories of the past, it fundamentally altered the way people understood themselves and their place in the world. In the past, history had often been written by the victors, shaped by those in power who could control the narrative. But now, for the first time in history, everyone had a voice. This democratization of storytelling unleashed a wave of self-reflection and empathy that rippled through every aspect of society. Social justice movements, which had long been ignored or marginalized, found new life within the Chronicles platform. Stories of inequality, oppression, and resistance, once relegated to the shadows, were brought to light, not just as isolated incidents, but as part of a global conversation about the shared responsibility to create a more just world. These stories became catalysts for change, inspiring individuals to take action, to demand better from their leaders, and to fight for the rights of those who had long been silenced. At the same time, the movement brought about a redefinition of what it meant to be part of a global community. People no longer viewed themselves as isolated from others, but as part of a vast and interconnected web of experiences. The shared storytelling experience fostered a deeper sense of empathy, as individuals from different cultures, religions, and backgrounds could finally see the world through each other's eyes. This newfound empathy had a profound impact on the way people interacted with each other. Division and conflict, while still present, were slowly replaced by dialogue and collaboration. The very act of sharing stories, of recognizing each person's unique contribution to the larger narrative, became a tool for healing and reconciliation. Communities that had been torn apart by war, by racial or ethnic strife, began to come together, not to erase their differences, but to embrace them as essential parts of a collective history. On a practical level, the Chronicles also revolutionized education. Students no longer studied history as a dry list of dates and events, but as a living, breathing tapestry woven together by the countless individuals who had shaped it. The emphasis was no longer on memorizing facts but on understanding the stories behind those facts, the motivations, the struggles, the emotions, and the consequences. This holistic approach to history sparked a new kind of intellectual curiosity, one that encouraged students to think critically about the world around them and to question the narratives they had been taught. As the Chronicles movement matured, the role of the Guardians continued to evolve. Initially, the Guardians had been seen as vigilant protectors of the timeline, keeping watch over history to ensure that no one could tamper with it. But in this new age, their role expanded beyond mere preservation. The Guardians became guides, mentors to the people, helping them navigate the complexities of a world where history was not static, but fluid and constantly evolving. The Guardians encouraged people to engage with the past, not as a way of clinging to outdated ideas, but as a means of learning from mistakes and building a better future. They facilitated workshops and forums where individuals could reflect on their own histories, encouraging self-discovery and personal growth. They worked with governments and organizations to ensure that policies were shaped by a thorough understanding of the past, promoting a more sustainable and inclusive vision of the future. At the same time, the Guardians continued to monitor the integrity of the Chronicles platform. They kept an eye on emerging technologies and trends, ensuring that no new force would arise to disrupt the global dialogue. They also worked to maintain the ethical standards of storytelling, ensuring that no one group would dominate the narrative or erase the stories of others. Despite their evolving role, the Guardians remained steadfast in their commitment to protecting the truth. As the world became more interconnected, the threats to that truth became more subtle and insidious: misinformation, algorithmic biases, and the manipulation of media. The Guardian's responsibility was not only to preserve the timeline but to safeguard the integrity of the stories that shaped it. The legacy of time, looking to the future. As the decades passed, the Guardian's mission became intertwined with the very fabric of global society. The stories shared within the Chronicles had a lasting impact on how people understood their shared humanity, and the ethical principles that guided those stories shaped the future in ways that could not have been predicted. New generations, born into a world where storytelling was celebrated and diverse voices were heard, grew up with a deep appreciation for the past, the present, and the future. They understood that history was not just something that had happened to them, but something they had the power to shape. And the Guardians, who had once stood as silent sentinels, were now seen as wise elders, guiding humanity toward a more inclusive, compassionate future. The world was no longer a place where history was something to be controlled or rewritten, it was a place where history was a shared responsibility. Each person, regardless of their status or position, was a part of the ongoing narrative. The story of humanity was no longer owned by a select few, it was a living, evolving tapestry that belonged to everyone. As the Guardians' influence continued to expand, so did the movement they had inspired. The stories shared within the Chronicles became more than just a record of history, they became a powerful tool for reshaping global governance. The influence of storytelling permeated every level of society, from local communities to the halls of international power. People began to view governance not as a top-down structure, but as a collective endeavor, driven by the voices of individuals and communities. The impact of the Chronicles was most evident in the way governments operated. Once, power had been concentrated in the hands of a few elite individuals or groups. But now, thanks to the global platform of the Chronicles and the rise of the unseen Guardians, people were demanding a new kind of leadership, one that was transparent, inclusive, and rooted in the shared experiences of all people. Leaders were no longer simply voted into power, they were chosen based on their ability to listen to the stories of their constituents and act in ways that reflected the collective will of the people. In this new world, political leaders were required to undergo a rigorous process of storytelling themselves. They had to share their personal histories, their motivations, and their vision for the future with the public. This transparency, once seen as a vulnerability, became a strength, as it allowed the people to see their leaders not as distant figures of power, but as individuals who were part of the same global narrative. The public, empowered by their own stories and the lessons they had learned from the past, held their leaders accountable in ways that had never been possible before. Simultaneously, the rise of the Chronicles also gave rise to new forms of international cooperation. Global challenges, such as climate change, poverty, and inequality, were no longer viewed as isolated problems to be solved by a select few nations or organizations. Instead, they were seen as shared challenges that required a collective response. Governments, businesses, and civil society organizations came together to create solutions that were informed by the diverse perspectives and experiences of people from all over the world. The Guardians played a crucial role in fostering this new spirit of global cooperation. They facilitated dialogues between different nations, ensuring that the voices of marginalized communities were heard and that solutions were inclusive and equitable. They also worked to ensure that the flow of information across borders remained transparent and free from manipulation, protecting the integrity of the global conversation. This new era of global governance, fueled by the stories of individuals and communities, marked a dramatic departure from the past. The once rigid structures of power and control were replaced by a dynamic, fluid system in which the people were the true stewards of their future. The role of governments, businesses, and other institutions was no longer to impose their will on others, but to listen, adapt, and collaborate. As the movement for inclusive storytelling spread, it also had a profound impact on culture and identity. People began to redefine what it meant to belong to a culture, a nation, or a community. No longer were identities fixed or monolithic, they were dynamic, fluid, and constantly evolving. The stories people told about themselves and their heritage became not just a reflection of who they were, but a guide to who they could become. Cultural exchange flourished in ways that had never been seen before. Thanks to the rise of the Chronicles platform, people from different cultures, languages, and traditions could easily connect with one another, share their stories, and learn from each other. This interconnectedness gave rise to a new kind of global citizenship, one that was rooted in mutual respect and understanding rather than nationalism or tribalism. In the world of art and creativity, the effects were just as profound. The stories shared through the Chronicles became a source of inspiration for a new wave of creative expression. Writers, filmmakers, musicians, and visual artists began to draw from the vast well of human experience that had been made accessible through the movement. Art, once a tool for personal expression or political propaganda, became a universal language through which people could communicate their shared humanity. The global focus on storytelling also had a transformative effect on education. Students were no longer taught to memorize facts and dates, they were taught to engage with history, culture, and human experience in a way that was holistic and inclusive. Education systems around the world began to place a greater emphasis on critical thinking, empathy, and global awareness. The emphasis was on learning how to ask the right questions, to listen to different perspectives, and to understand the complexities of the world. Despite the unprecedented progress made in global cooperation and inclusivity, the future was not without its challenges. As more and more people embraced the power of storytelling and shared their truths, new threats emerged, ones that were more subtle and insidious than the ones the Guardians had faced in the past. One of the most significant challenges came in the form of digital manipulation. While the Chronicles platform had been created to ensure transparency and truth, the rise of new technologies, such as deepfakes, artificial intelligence, and advanced data manipulation tools, threatened to undermine the very foundation of the movement. These technologies had the potential to create false narratives, manipulate emotions, and distort reality in ways that were almost impossible to detect. The Guardians, having witnessed the dangers of unchecked power in the past, knew that they had to stay vigilant. They worked with technologists and ethicists to develop new tools and protocols that would ensure the integrity of the stories shared on the Chronicles platform. These tools, powered by advanced AI, could detect and flag instances of manipulation, ensuring that only authentic stories were allowed to take root. But digital manipulation was not the only threat. As people began to share more personal stories, about their traumas, their vulnerabilities, and their struggles, there was a growing concern about privacy and the potential for exploitation. The very act of sharing one's story could expose individuals to harm, whether through targeted attacks, harassment, or the misappropriation of personal data. To address these concerns, the Guardians established new ethical guidelines for storytelling, emphasizing the importance of consent, anonymity, and respect for privacy. They also worked with legal experts to create protections for individuals who shared their stories, ensuring that their rights were upheld and their identities safeguarded. The future of storytelling, a legacy of truth and connection. As humanity moved further into this new age of interconnected storytelling, the question of what the future would hold remained uncertain. What was clear, however, was that the Guardians had helped to build a foundation, a global movement that celebrated the power of truth, empathy, and shared experience. In the years to come, the Guardians knew that the world would continue to evolve, and so too would the stories that shaped it. But they were confident that, with the lessons of the past in mind and the tools of the present at their disposal, humanity could navigate the complexities of the future without losing sight of the values that had brought them together in the first place. The Guardians had learned, through their trials and triumphs, that history was not something to be controlled or manipulated, but something to be shared, understood, and respected. The future would not be defined by a single story, but by the many stories that made up the rich, diverse, and ever-evolving tapestry of human existence. And so, as the Guardians looked ahead, they did so with hope, not just for the preservation of the past, but for the creation of a future built on truth, connection, and the shared power of storytelling. As the centuries rolled forward, the Chronicles had irrevocably altered not only the way people viewed the past but how they envisioned the future. The movement had long since shifted from a tool of historical preservation to a fundamental force for shaping society's collective consciousness. Humanity, empowered by the global dialogue fostered by the Chronicles, now faced a unique challenge: how to ensure that the next generations could preserve the integrity of their stories while adapting to the ever-evolving complexities of a rapidly changing world. The rise of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and immersive virtual realities introduced new dimensions to storytelling. These technologies had the potential to alter human perception, reshape communication, and, if used irresponsibly, pose risks to the very foundation of truth. As such, the Guardians' role had expanded beyond their initial purpose of safeguarding the timeline to that of guiding humanity through the ethical implications of these emerging technologies. In particular, quantum computing posed a paradoxical challenge. With its immense power, it could both enhance human understanding of complex narratives and unravel the threads of truth itself. The Guardians worked tirelessly with the brightest minds in technology and ethics to develop new systems, quantum ethics protocols, designed to ensure that the stories created through these advanced technologies remained grounded in integrity and accountability. These protocols were not only technical safeguards but also a philosophical approach to storytelling in an age of infinite possibilities. They emphasized that stories, whether based on reality, virtual worlds, or speculative futures, must be anchored in a respect for the human experience. And this respect meant that no matter how advanced the technology, the stories shared must always reflect the values of empathy, transparency, and inclusivity. As technology evolved, so too did the nature of storytelling. Virtual realities, once confined to the realm of video games and speculative fiction, began to intersect with the physical world in ways that were unimaginable just a few decades earlier. The Chronicles became an immersive experience, allowing people not only to read or watch stories but to live them. Imagine entering a world where you could step into the shoes of historical figures, reliving their pivotal moments. Or perhaps you would find yourself in an alternate dimension where history had unfolded differently, an opportunity to explore what might have been. The advent of such advanced storytelling tools brought forth profound questions. What is the line between reality and fiction? How can we maintain the authenticity of human experience when the line between the two becomes so blurred? The Guardians, recognizing the potential for both awe and danger in this new form of storytelling, took a proactive approach to regulate and guide its development. They established the Chronicles Immersive Code, a set of ethical guidelines designed to govern the creation of alternate realities. This code ensured that virtual experiences, no matter how convincing, did not distort or manipulate the truth, but rather provided new perspectives that deepened understanding. One particularly ambitious project was the creation of an immersive experience called Chronicles of the Lost Voices. This project allowed individuals to step into the lives of those whose stories had been forgotten or suppressed throughout history. Whether it was the life of a forgotten activist, an enslaved person, or a marginalized community, the experience was designed to give voice to those who had been erased from traditional historical narratives. The emotional impact of these experiences was profound. People, regardless of their background, began to develop a deeper empathy for others, as they could literally walk in someone else's shoes. It was no longer enough to simply read about history, one had to feel it, to experience it, in all its pain and triumph. And this empathy, in turn, fueled a renewed commitment to creating a world where such stories would never again be silenced. The Guardians' new role, ethical stewards of technology and truth. As the world became more technologically advanced, the Guardians found themselves not only as stewards of human history but as ethical navigators of the future. They expanded their focus from protecting the past to actively guiding the present and future through the vast sea of emerging technologies. One of the most significant challenges was how to balance innovation with preservation. The Guardians understood that the advancement of technology could bring about extraordinary benefits, from curing diseases to addressing global crises like climate change. But they also knew that unchecked technological progress could lead to unforeseen consequences, such as the exploitation of personal data, the erosion of privacy, or the creation of alternate realities that blurred the lines of moral and ethical responsibility. To address this, the Guardians formed new partnerships with scientists, philosophers, and technologists. They established the Global Ethics Consortium, GEC, a cross-disciplinary body dedicated to the ethical implications of emerging technologies. The GEC became a pivotal institution in ensuring that new innovations, whether in AI, quantum computing, or biotechnology, were developed with a deep respect for human dignity, individual rights, and global well-being. At the core of the GEC's work was the principle that technology should always serve humanity, not the other way around. This meant prioritizing solutions that were sustainable, inclusive, and aligned with the values of the Chronicles: empathy, transparency, and mutual respect. The Guardians worked to ensure that every new technological breakthrough was evaluated through an ethical lens, asking fundamental questions: how will this technology impact society? Who stands to benefit, and who might be harmed? How can we protect the integrity of truth in a world increasingly shaped by virtual experiences? Looking ahead, the Guardians remained steadfast in their commitment to guiding humanity toward a future where storytelling remained a powerful tool for social change, healing, and progress. But as the world entered this new age of technological and societal transformation, it became clear that the journey was far from over. New challenges would arise, some expected, some unforeseen, but the foundations that had been laid over the centuries would serve as a guide. One of the most critical aspects of this ongoing transformation was the education of future generations. The Chronicles had reshaped how history was taught, but now the focus was on preparing young minds for a future where technology and storytelling would be intertwined. Schools and universities around the world began to implement new curricula designed to teach students not only the facts of history but also how to critically engage with the stories they encountered in the world around them. Storytelling, once confined to the realms of literature and oral tradition, became a central focus of education in every discipline, from politics to science, art to engineering. In this new world, the ability to tell a compelling, authentic story was seen as one of the most valuable skills a person could possess. It was not just about crafting narratives for entertainment or marketing, it was about shaping the future. The ability to communicate one's ideas, experiences, and truths in ways that resonated with others became a crucial tool for solving global problems and building a more just and equitable world. But perhaps the most significant change of all was the shift in how people viewed their role in the world. No longer passive consumers of stories, individuals became active participants in the ongoing narrative of humanity. Every person had the opportunity to contribute their unique story to the global conversation, to shape the future, one story at a time. As the centuries passed, the Guardians, now an intergenerational body of wisdom, remained vigilant stewards of humanity's most precious resource, its stories. Though the tools and technologies had changed, the core values that had driven the Chronicles remained as relevant as ever. The Guardians knew that the future of humanity would always be shaped by the stories it told, and that those stories, more than any technology, would be the key to navigating the complexities of an uncertain future. The Chronicles had proven that humanity was more than just a collection of isolated events, it was a continuous, evolving narrative. And as long as the stories of the past, present, and future continued to be told with truth, empathy, and respect, the world would continue to be shaped by the enduring power of storytelling. And so, with every passing generation, the Chronicles grew, expanding its influence and enriching the global dialogue. The Guardians, ever watchful, continued their mission, to ensure that no story, no matter how small or obscure, would ever be lost to time. For in the end, it was these stories, told with honesty and shared with the world, that held the key to the future of humanity. As the Chronicles continued to expand and evolve, its influence began to make profound inroads into some of the most persistent global issues. One of the most pressing challenges it helped address was inequality. For centuries, inequality, whether based on wealth, race, gender, or access to education, had remained a constant scourge in societies around the world. The Guardians, understanding that the fight for social justice could not be won through rhetoric alone, turned to the power of storytelling as a tool for social change. By connecting people across borders and cultures, the Chronicles became a platform for amplifying the voices of those most affected by systemic inequality. Stories of marginalized communities, those who had been denied opportunities or silenced by the dominant narratives of power, took center stage. These stories became a force for awareness, understanding, and action. By allowing people to experience the lives of others firsthand, the Chronicles built a bridge of empathy that transcended geographical and cultural divides. One of the most successful initiatives stemming from this approach was the Global Equality Project, GEP, which used the Chronicles platform to document and share stories of inequality from around the world. Whether it was the struggles of indigenous communities fighting to preserve their lands, the experiences of women in developing countries fighting for education and autonomy, or the voices of refugees seeking safety and dignity, the GEP brought attention to these issues in ways that traditional media had failed to do. The impact of these stories was staggering. Governments, once insulated from the real lives of their citizens, began to feel the pressure to enact real change. International organizations, businesses, and local leaders found themselves confronted with the undeniable truth that inequality was not just an abstract issue, it was a matter of human dignity and survival. As the stories of inequality poured in from every corner of the globe, the call for action became too loud to ignore. Another issue that became central to the narrative of the Chronicles was climate change. As the world faced increasingly severe environmental crises, from rising sea levels to catastrophic weather events, the Guardians and other leaders knew that the fight against climate change needed more than just policy, it needed a global transformation in how people perceived their relationship with the Earth. The Chronicles served as a vehicle for environmental storytelling, shining a light on the personal stories of individuals and communities affected by climate disasters. These stories, from farmers losing their livelihoods to droughts, to island nations grappling with the threat of disappearing beneath rising oceans, moved people in ways that scientific data alone could not. They brought the reality of climate change to the forefront, not as a distant issue, but as one that was deeply personal, urgent, and tied to the survival of humanity. In response, the Chronicles launched the Earth's Echo Initiative, a global storytelling project focused on climate resilience and sustainability. This project connected people who were on the front lines of the climate crisis, whether they were activists, scientists, community leaders, or everyday citizens, with people in wealthier, more industrialized nations. The goal was to foster a global dialogue about how to mitigate environmental damage, adapt to the inevitable changes, and work towards a more sustainable future. The Earth's Echo project was pivotal in shifting the conversation about climate change from one of doom and despair to one of hope and action. It highlighted the efforts of communities around the world who were fighting back against environmental destruction by employing innovative, sustainable practices. Stories of reforestation, renewable energy initiatives, and community-led conservation projects demonstrated that it was possible to create a more sustainable world, even in the face of overwhelming odds. This shift in narrative helped spark a global movement for climate justice, with governments and corporations under pressure to act. Policies around renewable energy, carbon reduction, and environmental protection gained momentum. The Chronicles, through the lens of human experience, helped create a new narrative around the climate crisis, one that emphasized collective responsibility, innovative solutions, and a renewed connection between humanity and the planet. One of the most defining features of this new era was the role of technology in preserving and sharing stories. As digital platforms became more pervasive, there was an ever-increasing need to safeguard the integrity of information and ensure that the technology used to tell these stories was ethical, secure, and transparent. The rise of deepfakes, AI-generated content, and the manipulation of digital media created new concerns about the truthfulness of online narratives. As immersive storytelling technologies like virtual reality and augmented reality became more advanced, the line between fiction and reality became increasingly blurred. This posed significant risks, particularly when false narratives could be created that were so convincing, they could alter public opinion or even destabilize societies. To combat this, the Guardians, in collaboration with the Global Ethics Consortium, GEC, developed a set of new protocols known as the Digital Truth Standards. These protocols aimed to ensure that stories shared through digital platforms adhered to the highest standards of authenticity and integrity. Advanced AI systems, powered by machine learning algorithms, were employed to verify the origins and truthfulness of digital content, while blockchain technology was used to establish an unalterable record of the content's creation and distribution. The Chronicles platform itself evolved into a dynamic ecosystem where every story, from the personal to the political, was accompanied by transparent data that verified its authenticity. This ensured that even as the tools of storytelling became more powerful, they would be used responsibly, to foster truth rather than deception. While the world had made significant strides in addressing inequality, climate change, and the ethical implications of digital media, the true power of the Chronicles lay in its ability to foster global unity. The platform had created a new vision for humanity, one in which individual stories were not seen as isolated events but as part of a shared, global narrative. This new vision emphasized that no matter where a person lived, no matter their background or beliefs, they were part of a larger story. The Chronicles helped break down barriers of misunderstanding and mistrust, allowing people to connect with each other on a deeply personal level. The idea of borders, whether political, social, or cultural, began to lose meaning as people embraced a more interconnected, global sense of identity. This vision of global unity was embodied in the United Stories Initiative, USI, a campaign launched by the Chronicles to promote cultural exchange, collaboration, and mutual understanding. Through the USI, individuals, communities, and nations were encouraged to share their stories with others, learning about different ways of life, struggles, and triumphs. The initiative fostered a new kind of empathy, one that transcended national boundaries and created a world where the story of one was the story of all. In time, the United Stories Initiative became the cornerstone of a new global movement. It wasn't just about sharing stories anymore, it was about recognizing the interconnectedness of the human experience. Every person, every culture, every community had a part to play in the ongoing narrative of humanity, and together, they could build a future that was more just, compassionate, and united than ever before. As we look toward the future, it's clear that storytelling will remain a central force in shaping the world. The Chronicles, a legacy that began as a tool to preserve history, has grown into a global movement that transcends borders and cultures. The Guardians, with their unwavering commitment to truth and empathy, have guided humanity through an era of unprecedented technological, social, and environmental transformation. The future is still unwritten, and yet it is clear that the stories we share will continue to shape the course of our lives. In a world where technology, culture, and identity are constantly evolving, it is the stories of humanity that will bind us together. The Chronicles, in its many forms, will ensure that the voices of all people, from all walks of life, are heard and preserved for generations to come. The legacy of the Chronicles is not just in the stories told, but in the world they create, a world where empathy, truth, and collaboration are at the heart of every decision. As the story of humanity continues to unfold, it is our collective voices, our shared experiences, and our unwavering commitment to truth that will shape the future. And as long as the chronicles endure, the stories will live on, guiding, teaching, and inspiring those who come after us, ensuring that the lessons of the past are never forgotten, and that the future remains a story worth telling. The Chronicles, which began as a simple collection of stories, has blossomed into a monumental force in the shaping of humanity's future. From preserving the past to navigating the complexities of the present and future, it has guided the world through the turbulent waters of technological advancement, societal change, and ethical dilemmas. The guardians, stewards of truth, have not only protected the integrity of the narrative but have actively shaped it, ensuring that every story told reflects the fundamental values of empathy, transparency, and justice. Through the powerful combination of human connection, technology, and shared experience, the Chronicles has become more than just a record of what was, it has become a roadmap for what can be. By elevating the voices of those who have been historically marginalized, by inspiring a global dialogue around issues like inequality and climate change, and by safeguarding the authenticity of digital content, it has paved the way for a future that is both compassionate and innovative. As we look toward that future, one thing is clear: stories will continue to be at the heart of human progress. They are not just reflections of the past, they are the blueprints for tomorrow. The Chronicles ensures that those stories, no matter where they come from or what form they take, will be shared with the world, shaping a more just, united, and transparent global community. And so, as the world moves forward, it does so with the knowledge that each person's story is a vital part of a larger, ongoing narrative. The stories of today will guide the world of tomorrow, and as long as the Chronicles endure, the truth will always have a place to be heard, understood, and celebrated. In this ever-evolving world, the Chronicle stands as a testament to the enduring power of stories, proof that, no matter the era, the story of humanity is a story worth telling.